Alex, thanks for joining me. I've got loads of questions that I'd like to ask you about farming and food production. Also, I'm interested to find out about your own health journey and how an ancestral approach to diet and lifestyle, which is, I believe, how you've described it, how that's helped you, and yeah, what positive impact it's had for you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Imran. Yeah, and it's great to be on and having chats about these things, which I'm really interested in. My story of getting to where I am today, I had years, probably, you know, the vast majority of my life up until only a few years ago, where I had all kinds of health issues. It started with all these skin issues and gut issues, and it I kind of went down the rabbit hole. Like nothing was working. What the doctors were telling me, um, using creams and not really looking at nutrition or health at all. And it took me to realise I had some food intolerances, and kind of took me down the rabbit hole to where I am now. And it took a while. It took a lot of learning, but realised things like my own. I suffered from depression for a while, low energy, low mood, um, anemia, so low iron. And as I changed things, mainly with what I was eating, I realised that everything I was eating was having an effect, whether that was a good one or a bad one. So yeah, what I did realise is you can make big changes once. It was about healing and letting your body heal, and not using your own experience rather than just listening to what you get told is right. And yeah, it took me to a position where the last year or so, and about a year ago, where I was really just felt like a thriving for the first time possibly ever, and opened up energies and lack of low moods, good moods, that I'd not experienced before. So yeah, I've started coaching people and helping them to do the same. Um, so that's kind of me on the health side.
So when did these issues start out? Did they go back as far as you can remember, or was there perhaps a trigger?
Yeah, I remember having them. When I was primary school, I remember like things like having boils that would open up sometimes. I remember getting lanced in the doctors. I guess was one day my foot swelled up, um, and so that was years ago, um, and that carried on for a while. Same with my gut. And skin issues. It was a type of eczema really bad on my hands, and that um, was happening when I was really young. And I actually did get. I'm laughing now, but I got I had arthritis in my hands and feet as a really young boy, and I didn't know what it was then. But I'm laughing because like part of the bone in your foot would swell up and stick out for me, and I got told that the best thing to do was smack it with a big book because like just to get it down. So yeah, I never put all of these things together, but it's now looking back, I realise it's all to do with predominantly what I was eating.
So what were the first things that you noticed that were having a positive or negative effect?
I cut out gluten, and that was a big thing. That was probably getting on. That was about 11 years ago, and you know, I saw that these skin issues and gut issues. It was actually a trip. I went away to traveling around Vietnam, Cambodia for a summer, And I came back, and for the first time ever, all these skin issues had gone. And I came back and just started eating normal student foods, and I was literally sat on the toilet for the next 2 weeks, all day, every day, and I was like, what is going on? So then I put two and two together. I'd just been eating rice, where before, I've been eating bread and pasta most days. So that was the kind of awakening with gluten, but it was a very long and slow road that took me into other things like vegetable oils, other grains, foods like, we talk about the FODMAP foods, so things like garlic and onions, and it took me, further and further down to work out that there was a few things, not just gluten.
Mm. So what does your diet look like now?
Well, I mean, it's taken years of experimenting, and particularly the last couple going very, kind of being very careful and watchful of what I do. And at the moment, probably the last year, I am pretty much carnivore. So I eat a lot of red meat and not that much in terms of vegetables, or other things. I have experimented with fruit, and I don't eat like a monk now, because I think all day every day just meat. I do think that seems to work for me the best, but I do think you should enjoy yourself and take occasions as they come. But what I was going to say about sugar or fruit is, and that some people do eat fruit as well and do well with it, but I would say that myself and everyone's different. I kind of was having fruit and meat, and yeah, it was very soon just became a bit of an addiction to me. So because of the fructose and glucose, and from what I've learned, like sugar, which fructose is, can be as addictive as things like cocaine and other drugs. So, it's very individual, but yeah, I am predominantly meat based at the moment.
Yeah, I've been through lots of variations of mostly carnivore diets where I've added other things in, maybe some dairy, some fruit. Um, I think when I first did it, the mistake I made was I went quite lean carnivore, which I say that was a mistake for me. Um, and I felt like I was still craving some sugar. Generally don't have very many sweet cravings, but when I went onto this low fat carnivore diet, I did feel like I wanted sugar. I wanted to eat fruit, and I was thirsty, and just the idea of a juicy piece of fruit like a grapefruit or something like that
Yeah.
was really appealing. I think the main mistake I was making was not enough fat, and that high protein was probably causing the increased thirst, and maybe I just needed a little more readily available energy from sugar, because there wasn't enough energy coming from fat. It'd be relying on converting some of that protein to energy, which is not that efficient. So I just tried to stick to it for a while and thought maybe this taste or craving for some fruit will go away. It didn't really. So I thought, okay, I'll add some fruit in. And I started with, I'll have one piece of fruit a day plus my meat. That turned into 2 pieces of fruit per day. Then it's 3. And like you say, it is, for me, it's highly addictive as well. And it just went up and up and up and up until I just wanted to eat sugar all the time. But eventually, when I figured that out and went for a much higher fat, more carnivore style diet, yeah, that sort of taste for something sweet went away completely. And I'll still eat some fruit from time to time, but it's not so much of a craving that's there all the time. I want to go back to something that you said a minute ago, actually, about the first time you noticed some sort of remission from these symptoms was actually when you were on holiday. Um, When I first started having issues with what seemed like food intolerance to everything you can imagine, I was trying to figure it out. I was doing food diaries for months, trying to match how I felt with what I was eating. Wasn't getting anywhere, so I think it was after about 7 or 8 months I gave up. And it was the Christmas holidays, and I was spending some time with my family. I thought I'm just going to relax for 2 weeks. I had the whole 2 weeks off work. I'm going to eat whatever I want. And during that time, I had zero, as far as I can remember, zero digestive issues, eating whatever I wanted. What's going on here? And I kind of spoke to some other people about it, and what I came to is stress is a huge factor as well. While I was working really hard at that point, training quite hard, and when I took those two factors out, all of a sudden I could eat pretty much what I wanted. So, do you think there's other factors other than just diet? Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I focus on first with the people I'm coaching. Like you said, stress, cortisol spikes. Like, small amounts is good, and can help you be productive and whatever. But in the modern world, it can be very easy to be overrun like throughout the day with that. And yeah, you bang on. If your body's highly stressed, then you're in fight or flight, and your body's not concentrating on digesting and resting and all the good that comes with that. And yeah, I was just looking at something the other day. This doctor who was talking about his client who, first month, and I've seen this myself, the first month the person he was helping wasn't losing any weight, and they were massively obese, and he had them on what he thought was a good plan. It was only when he addressed what was making them stressed, and they put time into the person's plan to really focus on themselves, what they enjoy, particularly when they woke up, and before they went to bed, things like having a bath and just shutting off or reading a book like that they enjoyed, and which is easier said than done, but they managed this. And then I think the first month this person lost 3 pounds. The next month they went up to 6. The next month they went up to 10, and it just kept building because, like you said there, their body wasn't in such a frenzied state.
Yeah, I think that was my experience at the time. I was working in the gym, so starting early, finishing late, squeezing meals in between sessions and my own training sessions. So, hardly any time to digest food properly. It's kind of obvious, really, looking back. Um, yeah, so with your diet now, mainly meat based, and the work that you do, that seems like that's a good marriage of being in the right place to be able to access good quality food. Um, we had this discussion about this when we first spoke. If you're eating a mainly meat based carnivore type diet, can you do that well through supermarket food, do you think?
Yeah, so yeah, I also work as a consultant for farmers to help them. It's kind of difficult times at the moment, and we can expand on that, helping them to improve their practices and bring in more profits. To help with their survival. Now, supermarket foods, I think they often get a bad name for things like beef and lamb, but these are actually coming from, if these, well, often British, but regardless, really, if they're coming from what the cattle and the sheep are doing is most of their time they will be eating grass anyway. They're not in the UK battery farms like these massive operations you get elsewhere. So for a lot of the time, and sometimes their whole life, they are eating a diet of what they are designed for. Mainly grass. They often do get fattened on things like wheat, but and I'll make I'll kind of get onto the difference to other animals. Their digestive systems as ruminants means that they use fermentation, and that can break down things like wheat, as well as grass. Um, Unlike other animals, so yeah, you can get good quality meat still from the supermarkets. Where I would draw the line and say it's a lower quality is particularly chicken and pork, and that again is coming from what they eat. And people like Michael Pollan, I think, said, "You, it's not you are what you eat; it's you are what you eat." Ate. And chickens and porks, they are really in big factory systems the majority of the time, largely housed, and they are eating a mix of things that their body's not necessarily designed for. So whether that's soy blends with wheat and corn, maize. So I do think that does put a lot of stress on the animal and people, and I think also ethically that is an important point. But and they're not as healthy as, say, the beef and sheep. Um, and you can also talk about things like linoleic acid, which builds up, which is like omega 6, comes from the foods that they're eating. So um, that is higher in those meats, and also eggs that aren't raised, in a good quality way.
Yeah, I think it's probably also reflected in the price. If you can buy a whole chicken for £3 or a giant joint of pork for five, um, that for me raises a few suspicions. Um, it implies that probably that food has been, mass produced, factory farmed, and can't be of the highest quality. So there's the ethical side of that. Do you want to support that? But also
Yeah.
the impact on
Well,
your own health.
no, you're right. You're right. I mean, that cost is coming out somewhere. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's going to affect something else, which might be the animal's life. It might be excess pollution. All kinds of things. Interestingly, I heard recently that the biggest uh, producer of pork, a big factory, was going to be in Doncaster, and actually, there's not going to be any animals that were brought up in England going through that and being processed. They're all coming from Denmark, which has very cheap pork, and I think a lot of that's down to the welfare. Um, but yeah, it's kind of where people are wanting cheap meat, and I get that, especially with inflation and all that, and it is difficult. But yeah, the cheaper something is, definitely the lower quality it is. Um, I
Yeah,
will say
here's
another
where I'd
reason.
push back on that a little.
Go
Is
on,
that
go on.
not against you personally, but the percentage of people's income that we spend on food compared to previous decades is lower every decade
Yeah, I
because
love this. I love this. By the way,
mm,
it's I completely agree. I think back, was it? I don't know the stats now. Maybe 50 years ago, people spent 25% of their income on food, and now it's about 9 or 10%.
mm,
And you know, this is where we've got to take a step back and think, what are my priorities? Because you know, we're in this crazy consumerist world where you can easily get caught up in, you know, buying all these electronic goods, Netflix, deliveries, um, the list goes on, and we just didn't have those same costs back, 50, 100, however many years ago. So Yeah, that would be
Mm,
that would kind of be my. I completely agree with you. Just if your health, if you're having some health issues or you feel tired, and at the same time you're struggling to eat, to buy good food, because that's another thing that pisses me off, is that all the cheapest food is the worst food for you. So it's easy to get in that trap. But
mm.
yeah, that's what I would say to anyone is see how you can streamline your life. You might be surprised at those costs that are coming out that aren't actually giving you that much happiness. And yeah, maybe then you can start spending more on better quality food.
Yeah, agreed. It's about resources, isn't it? And priorities. Sorry. So if you have, yeah, it's about priorities. If you've got limited resources, as most people do, most people are on some kind of fixed sort of salary, but you want to have 3 holidays a year. Um, you've got the latest German high performance car. You've got the latest phone. You spend, I don't know, £50 going out, drinking alcohol, drinking cocktails, whatever. But then you complain that meat's gone up by 50 pence. you
Yeah,
know, you've just got to decide really what is your highest priority. Is it your health or is it all of these other things? It's a
yeah,
choice you've
you're
got to
right.
make.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is, do I need this or do I just want it?
Mm. Yeah, but I guess when people look around and they see that this is the norm to change your car regularly and have all these material things, and that's what all their peers are doing. Yeah, then a small increase in the price of food to them seems like a relatively large amount.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And
And
I think it goes back to as well. So many people don't really see the connection immediately between the quality of what they eat. To my mind, I'm buying the most high quality food I can afford. That's my number one priority. I'm not skimping on buying food because I can see the benefit of it. But if that hasn't really clicked for you yet, then it's just an expense that you try and minimise.
yeah, yeah, and I, and I've been there, and it's so difficult because often when you have health issues, and also if you're working long hours and whatever, your energy's not there, so you're more likely, and it goes the same with drinking and all that. If the next day and the day, or when you get back from work, if your energy's not there, then it's more difficult to get yourself to cook something, and it's more easy to see the adverts for McDonald's on TV and think, oh yeah, go on, I'll get that. But then the tragic thing about this is it's a vicious cycle, like because you have these, you fall for your impulses and you might enjoy it for a little bit, but then you feel worse afterwards. You feel more tired. You're bloated. You've got no energy, um, and it just goes round and round in circles, and you can get progressively worse.
Yeah, I think when you're coaching people, I think your experience is probably similar. Finding that first foothold for somebody is the most important thing. Maybe it's they just have some more protein for their breakfast, or maybe they start going to bed earlier and just get their sleep in order. But yeah, people need to find one win which
Yeah,
they can build on, and that's going to give them the motivation to then start trying other things. But it could be different for everyone that you're coaching, really.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And well, I got two little points there. Like I I quit drinking, and at first it was very hard. Like to thinking, how am I going to socialize? And I've not done this before. Um, but after getting over breaking that cycle once, I was then realised, that was all right. That was easier than I thought, and I felt better the next day. But I then had that in my bag, that experience to um, like I've been there and done it before, so the next time it was a bit easier. And the point there is people, it's easy to sleepwalk through life and just go on impulse and not take a step back and think, is this actually benefiting me? Um, so yeah, if you can start having those little wins, whether that's going for a walk instead of sitting down to watch TV after a meal, um, start small and build it up, and you can build the experience, and yeah, very soon you can really transform things.
Hmm. So we started talking for a moment about the work that you do with farmers, and you're helping them with how they, I guess, structure their business and find different opportunities. So, what sort of challenges are they having?
Good question, and I would say a lot. We're getting back to a bit we were talking about earlier, was saying about, you should be spending money. If food goes up in price, then you know you should maybe be prioritizing that. Well, one thing that really frustrates me is supermarkets, which I think are a big problem. For example, prices of eggs went up in England probably, was it about 6 months ago now, maybe a bit more, maybe a year, and it kind of stayed up. And quite soon we found that a lack of eggs on the shelves, and the supermarkets were calling this inflation, but what the reality was is they weren't they were putting their prices up, but they weren't paying the farmer any more money. So because their costs as the farmers had gone up for things like your energy, your food, they then soon weren't economical, make like producing eggs for the supermarkets. So that was the real reason that eggs weren't on the shelves. And I've seen a report recently where, I'll see if I can find it for you uh, after we get off, but there was a research institute that's recently done, it was about this time last year actually, they did some research into where the profits go for supermarket food. So they looked at a number of different things. One was a 4-pack of beef burgers. So what they concluded is the amount of profit, and then so splitting up the profit, you have the farmer, you have the processors, logistics, and you have the supermarket and kind of other middle people. What they found was the farmer for this 4-pack of beef burgers was only getting 0.5 pence per 4-pack, and they are taking all the risk. Um, and they're just getting completely bullied by this abuse of power. So the supermarkets, they were making, it was about 40 times that in relation to their costs. So yeah, the massive issue I think, which doesn't really get spoken about, is the really low margins that farmers are facing.
So, what sort of solutions do you recommend for them? Is it a case of going direct to consumers, or what kind of things are they thinking about?
Yeah, yeah, because if you're selling to a supermarket or you're selling direct at a farmer's market, like an auction, then that is you're being played really. Because if you're selling at a market, then like a live animal, you depends who turns up on the day, but it's also a commodity product. So I think it's key to try and add value to your products. Now, this is probably one of the biggest issues I think is going again, which doesn't get talked about. The fact that the number of small abattoirs is massively, it's been decimated, and it means that farmers are struggling to be able to sell to get their own animals slaughtered and butchered to sell direct to customers. So I saw some stats the other day, just to give you a bit of context on that. So, this is what farmers have been doing for hundreds of years. But in 1970, there was 1,350 abattoirs in the UK. Now, in 2000, that had gone down to 300 and something. Again, 20 years after that, in 2020, the number was 135. Now, why this is such an issue is when previously farmers, as and when, especially the smaller farms, as and when they had animals ready, they could literally walk their animals to these small abattoirs to get them butchered and then to sell on in the local community. But what's happened now is because predominantly it's just the big players in terms of abattoirs who are surviving. Like firstly, the small farmer might have to travel like 100 miles just to get a few animals processed, which just makes it like wipes out the profit margins. And also there's the fact that these big abattoirs, they might not be bothered about these small orders, so they're over demanded at the moment.
So what sort of solutions do they have to this? What can they do to change this?
It's a difficult one because, something I'm currently developing is a network which links the farmers to the end customer, and kind of sorts that out for them. So whether that's them getting together in groups and being able to then go to the abattoirs or setting new ones up and having cooperatives, it is difficult. What I would say is, how do we get around this? Well, one way of doing it is for the customers to vote with your pocketbook, as they say, and do buy from these local farm shops or farmers. If you go to farmers markets, give them a reason to carry on and keep making a profit, because this will only get worse if it is left as it currently is.
So what are the economics of that like? So my experience of going to farmers markets or looking at some of the farms that seem to sell direct to consumers online is that a lot of the food costs quite a bit more than in the supermarket. So you're going to have to be quite motivated to spend that extra money. What puzzles me is if they've taken out the middleman of the supermarket, why is the cost actually higher?
It's a lot.
Or the price to consumer actually higher?
Yeah, a lot of it's down to economies of scale. So, like I said, these people that really do want to sell to customers, they might have to travel a lot further, which adds on all their fuel costs, and also things like, if you've only got a few animals that you want slaughtered and butchered, then you just don't get. You just have higher cost per animal. It's as simple as that, really. And then you've got all the costs of packaging, delivery, processing yourself. Whereas these big players can just do it more in a factory production process, which it's a lot of it is just down to the economies of scale.
It makes sense. My first thought was, I guess, a group of consumers can band together. Like, say, for example, I run a gym. We could have a meat delivery amongst members. That might sort of help with that economy of scale to some extent. But then immediately in my mind thought, well, what about the old-fashioned concept of a butcher on the high street? How do they play into this? Because there seem to be fewer butchers than there were years ago.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely right. I went to our village butcher the other day, and he was like running around frantic. I said, "What's up?" And he was all stressed out because the butcher down the road had closed, and that like the day before, which meant that they had all the orders from the other butcher. Which, as he said to me, that sounds like a good problem to have, but because we're only small and we're kind of one of the only ones around here, we are struggling to keep on top of everything ourselves. Like as a small business, there's a lot of red tape there, and a lack of people that want to kind of process the food. And as he was saying to me, he said, "I started this like 25 years ago. There used to be 8 butchers just within a couple of miles." He said, "Now we're the only one." And again, a lot of it's down. And any of the listeners, I challenge you to check me out on this. A lot of the cost in a butcher's isn't actually any more expensive, or definitely not much more expensive. But people just have the convenience of going to the supermarket now, where you can do all your shopping in one go. So yeah, if you do want to support local businesses, and like I said on there, thinking up 0.5 pence a burger, maybe it's time to, the supermarkets have had a good ride, but maybe it's time to start, pushing back a bit and providing uh, for local businesses and local people.
I'm as guilty as anyone of going for convenience and buying most of my food from the supermarket. There is a very good organic butcher's. It's just a little bit further away for me to drive, so it's more convenient to get some beef and some lamb from the supermarket. However, I think what might motivate people is seems to be some strange agendas going on globally uh, with with a view to what we should or shouldn't be eating, as determined by other people. Now, I'd rather have that choice myself, and I think if you're one of those people that would like to be able to choose for yourself and doesn't really feel the need to follow the ideas of an authority figure telling you what's good for you and what isn't without doing your own research, you might have to step out and make a bit more effort and support these smaller businesses now, before they all do disappear.
Absolutely, and this isn't conspiracy theories. Like this is out there in clear daylight. I saw a UN report the other day, and they were saying that in 2030 they want the average person eating is something like 90% less meat. And you know, I'm sick and tired of hearing that this is all for the environment, because that argument falls down like a pack of cards when you just do a bit of your own research. Fantastic book is Sacred Cow by Rob Wolf. Anyone want to read that? But um, what, without getting too much into that, it's like when you take a step back and think, well, why would they possibly want to do this? Well, who produces all the meat? It largely is small farmers, and like I said, I see them. I visit a lot of farmers weekly, and they are struggling, and it all seems to be against them. Um, what are the alternatives to that? Well, apparently, all this like the plant-based stuff. That's kind of the next thing to that will save the day. But just have a think, like who is able to produce that? Can a local farmer just produce a plant-based burger where it's got, if you just have a look at the back of the ingredients, it's got a list the size of my arm. And
But it's made of plants. I'm sure there's no environmental cost to plants, is there? Can't be.
I mean, so is
Plants are all
heroin.
good.
Yeah. Um, you just like, yeah, I think what I would say with a lot of the plant-based stuff is it needs to be built, it needs to be produced in a factory, and it's coming from all different sources. Um, the same as even your avocados, which come from Mexico or whatever. Um, Meat in the UK, like I go to a lot of hilltop farms. There are where you can't really grow anything else. Um, Apart from grass, like you can't be growing vegetables, you can't be growing fruit. So that is, the most efficient use of that land. Um, we talk about greenhouse gases, like I said, do your own research. Like just because some formal figure tells you that this is an issue, you know, animals are part of the solution. And a little quick, interesting story. I spoke to a farmer the other week, and he's an old guy, and he's got small farm, and he sells cattle. And he was saying, like I said, it's in a really rugged area. You can't do much else apart from grow grass. And he was saying the story of his neighbour. He was pointing to the field next door. He said, over that fence, the farmer who used to farm there, well, his son owns it now. When it was World War II, he said there was kind of called initiative by force that said that the government came round to this farmer's place, and they said, this whole green revolution afterwards, we need everyone, yourself included, to be growing a certain amount of wheat. And it's like 10%. You got to rip up 10% of your land, of your grass, and put it down to wheat. And whether that's a good food source, I mean, that's another thing. But he knew his land better than anyone, and he said that's just not going to work. Like the best thing I can do is keep producing beef on it. But they were adamant. The government said no. You need to rip it up, put it down to wheat. So this went back and forth for a while, and it got to the point where the farmer really kind of lost his cool, and the police ended up turning up at his house, to issue him a sanction or whatever. And he got that frustrated that he went around with his shotgun and he shot the side of the car. Now, they then went off, and obviously, that's not the right thing for he should have done. They went off, but they came back, and this is where it gets shocking. The police came back and shot him dead. And kind of my whole point on this little story is there's been it seems like for me, there's been agendas against farmers small scale for a while, and perhaps it's still the same, and it certainly seems that way, the way we're going.
Yeah, I think it's interesting times. The why of these agendas is the confusing part to me. Perhaps it's just about profit, that you can actually make more profit from a manufactured plant-based meat alternative. If you're the person controlling that industry, maybe there's more profit in it. It does seem like it's probably a small number of people who are thinking along these lines and are able to influence the conversation very effectively, because they have the means, the experience, through the media to influence how many people think. And if you get into conversations with people, the majority will, in my opinion, believe that beef is destroying the planet. It's responsible for global warming, and that seems to be the prevailing narrative. I think this is a subject which we could discuss at length, and maybe we should do a follow-up where we just discuss this, dig into this subject a little more, because there's a lot of different ways to look at it, a lot of different angles. We've covered quite a few things already. Want to be respectful of your time. And yeah, perhaps we should wrap up this conversation here and set up a part 2. In the meantime, you mentioned a couple of times that you do coach people with their health journey. Is there any particular resource, an Instagram, a website, or something like that you'd like to refer people to?
Yeah, so I have got an Instagram page, Alex Fresco Ancestral. Maybe yeah, that's the best place to find me on there. I've only started it recently, but yeah, that is the spot. And yeah, no, it's been a great chat, and it's a very important one. Yeah, perhaps we could touch on more of the reasons next time, but a fantastic podcast I listened to recently was Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and he was in a conference in Australia, and that delves into some of what look to be the reasons why there is this agenda against meat. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
Great. I'll try and find a link to that and share that as well. But yeah, this has been a pleasure. Hopefully we can do this again soon and get into some of these issues about why we're being told we shouldn't eat meat.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to ask before we go, what you're having for tea?
Yeah, it's probably not going to be anything that exciting. Midweek meal, I'm probably just going to cook some beef mince, and that might be all I have, just some beef mince.
Well, simple and effective. No, I like that.
Yeah, how about yourself?
Well, I've got a lovely lamb leg, which I've got in the oven going low and slow, straight from
That sounds good.
the butchers. So yeah, I will be enjoying that.
Yeah, enjoy. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers, Imran.